Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you're at. I'm so happy you could join us for this part 2 of the AT for Common Core College and Career Readiness for students with significant cognitive disabilities. As mentioned earlier, my name is Tana Donaghy, and I am the President of Educational Equity for All. I am an educational consultant who provides training for teachers, administrators, parents, paraeducators on how to work with kids with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing we want to do, of course, in special ed is to collect some data. So if you could fill out the survey and tell us who you are, we'll go ahead and find out who our audience is and get started. Okay. I'm happy to see we have a mix of a little bit of everything. We've got some teachers and some administrators, AT folks, and some parents. So I want to say again, welcome to this part 2 of the webinar series on college and career readiness. Take a look at our agenda for today. In this hour that we get to spend together, we're going to talk a little bit about college and career readiness and what that means. We're going to introduce the second element of the college and career readiness piece about fluency and lifelong learning and how we implement that in our classrooms. We're going to talk a little bit about the National Center and State Collaboratives curricular supports and how those really point out and go through the college and career readiness pieces. We'll talk a little bit about universal design for learning. And then we're going to jump right into activities and accessibility. I have provided some resources on here for you, and you can always email me and follow up if you would like other information. So let's jump in and talk about college and career readiness. One of the things I do need to point out, it was mentioned to me at the Closing the Gap conference this couple weeks ago, last week, that college and career readiness is not just for that transition planning. When we work on adult transition planning, we are talking about the future post-secondary options. But when we talk about college and career readiness for the Common Core State Standards, we're talking about K-12. Some people had mentioned it was a little misleading, and therefore I wanted to point out that we are talking about K-12. There are implications for preschool, and there are implications with Common Core for adult transition. But in this context, we're going to be talking about K-12, College and Career Readiness, Common Core State Standards. When we talk about Common Core State Standards and we talk about College and Career Readiness for All, we're talking about those 21st century skills. There's a lot of rhetoric out there about making sure all of our kids are able to compete in those 21st century skills. Well, these 4 elements on your screen right now are the college and career readiness for typical high school students. We're focusing in on key cognitive strategies, looking at key content in academics. We're talking about all those soft skills or academic behaviors, those executive functioning skills. We're also talking about the contextual skills and awareness, being able to ask for help, being able to find out those resources. Now, what does that mean for our kids with the most significant cognitive disabilities? Well, when we take all of these and we do a crosswalk with them, we find that the most functional skills in the 21st century are these 5. And you can see how they compare with the typical high school college and career readiness pieces. Everyone needs communicative competency. Everyone needs full access to academic content And that's what we're going to be talking about today, those problem-solving skills, those reading, writing, and math skills that we're still working on. And it might be at a different level, but all of our kids are still working on those pieces. We're talking about the development of appropriate social skills, both in small groups and in teams. And then we're talking about the development of independent work behaviors. We can see that for all our students across the nation. And then last but not least, we're talking about the support access skills. These are those skills for identifying and requesting support. In our follow-up webinars, we will be looking at the social skills, the independent work behaviors, and the support access skills at a later date. We do need to remember when we're talking about Common Core state standards and all the college and career readiness pieces that all standards now are expected of all students. Our challenge tends to be, how do we make that real in our classrooms? As a classroom teacher for over a decade, that was the biggest challenge, is making sure we had age-appropriate and age-respectful grade level content for our kids with the most complex needs. The implications that we're talking about with all standards for all students is that all students need access to that general curriculum, including reading and math. And our students with significant cognitive disabilities especially need that instruction. Whatever supports they may need to achieve the success on the alternate achievement standards test or those alternate assessments is where we need to focus our attention. Okay, so jumping into fluency and lifelong learning, basically when we boil it down to it, we're getting back to that reading, writing, and math skills. We're looking at the basic instruction. We've got a lot of different things happening with our state assessments out there right now, but if we just focus in on what these kids need as far as instruction, and we look at good instruction, we're going to be fine as it comes to Common Core. This is a great video. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to look at it right now, but I highly recommend taking a look at this video clip. This is a video clip from The Memory Keeper's Daughter from 2008. It's only a minute and 2 seconds, but it really points out the fight that parents had to go through to make sure that their kids were included in public education. In this story, a woman is fighting for the right of her daughter who has Down syndrome to be a part of public education. It's quite stunning for many people to watch this and see how far we've come. But if you've been in the field of special ed for any length of time, you might remember those days when our students were not always allowed to be a part of public education. We're not where we want to be, but we're a lot further than we ever were. And we're going to keep going down that road of making our general education curriculum accessible to all students. That gets us to our mission as special educators and parents and staff members. Our challenge is teaching grade level content at the functioning level of the student. Think of it this way. If I had a general education 11th grader, and this 11th grader was only reading at a second grade reading level, which is a very real possibility in our schools today. But do I give this 11th grader second grade work because that's where he's functioning, or do I give him 11th grade work at a second grade reading level? It's about giving kids the supports they need to aim to and be exposed to that grade level content. There are two critical mindsets that this starts with. In order to be able to provide this for our students and give them the access and supports they need, we need to keep in mind there are two pieces of thought processes we need to practice. The first one is presuming competence. I love this image. I'd like to blow it up and give everybody a poster of this in their classroom to remind us to always presume competence about our kids. The key here that I love is to presume competence is to respect the value of human diversity. Not presuming competence is to actively harm. We want to remember this. I walked into a classroom where I was coaching a teacher one time, and the first thing that I heard in the classroom is that these kids can't do anything. I was a bit taken back, and that was coming from the paraeducator. And I asked her, what makes you say that? She said, well, I just had a new baby, and these kids can't do the things my new baby can. It really stunned me that someone working with our kids still has that mindset, and we have to work to actively combat that mindset and make sure everyone is presuming competence for the kids that we work with. The second piece is going by the least dangerous assumption. Again, we talk about exposing students to learning is not harmful. However, keeping them from it is. I didn't know enough about my kids and their brains and what was going on with them to know how much they were picking up or not picking up. So I wanted to expose them to everything I possibly could. And too often we find that we're only exposing them to things we like as teachers and staff members and parents. But really reaching out of the box and giving them exposure to everything out there. One of the things I heard this past week was that it's not really giving them a choice if we're only giving them a selection of things we put out there. We're asking them to make selections then, not choices. So we want to keep that in mind as we move forward with what we're doing in Common Core with all of our students. We also want to take a look at and get back to developmental pieces. If we take a look at Piaget, you guys all remember Piaget, and we look at his stages of development. When we look at sensory motor, many of the kids I worked with were only functioning somewhere between birth to 24 months. When a child is in this stage of development, here are things that they can do. We talk about motor activity without the use of symbols. We talk about the knowledge of the world that is limited because it's based on the physical interaction and that sensory experiences that they're receiving. Object permanence is acquired about 7 months. So they might have some of that, but we know our kids also have splinter skills. The next stage of development is preoperational, about 2 years to 7 years of age. This is where the use of symbols and language use is beginning to mature. We're talking about some memory, some imagination, some pretend play perhaps. We're thinking in non-linear, non-logical manner and esoteric thinking. This is that age that we talk about, it's all about them. Me, 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 or mine, mine, mine. Most of us can tell when our kids in school actually hit that 2-year-old because of that behavior. That's typical development for these kids. The next level up, of course, is the concrete operational stage, about 7 years old to 11 years old. Excuse me. Here we begin to see logical and systematic manipulation of objects, really those concrete objects. This is important because, for example, when we all first get BoardMaker software and we want to create these wonderful pictures and these, icons to use all the time and everywhere, perhaps, depending on the developmental stage of our students, those pictures might not have any meaning yet. They might be too abstract, and our kids still need to be using the realia, using the objects instead of looking at those pictures. The next level up is our formal operational stage. These are where we have a logical use of symbols related to those abstract concepts. Okay, this is adolescence and early adulthood, and it continues on through adulthood. Most of our kids aren't necessarily at this stage, but perhaps, as I said, we might be working with our adult transition students. Okay, so here's when we go back and we try to really look at what does that mean, just that developmental milestone? How does it manifest itself in an activity? So if we take a look at these, we've got 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to match the developmental stage to the appropriate activity. So I'll give you a few seconds, and then we're going to go through these. Just take a look at them, and in your head, see if you can figure out which one is which. Okay, easy enough? Let's start with number 1. Student will identify objects found in the kitchen. Well, when we're talking about being able to identify objects, we're really talking about a preoperational stage. If we skip down to number 3 and we say student will respond to music with body movement, they're experiencing things on that sensory level. So we're talking about sensory motor stage. And in number 2, activity number 2, student will independently participate in a game with other students, taking turns as appropriate. We're talking about some pretty high-level thinking. We're talking about independence and turn-taking. So that is our concrete operational stage. Now these are important because they can also relate to our 3 levels of access with pre-symbolic, early symbolic, and symbolic functioning. As we develop our lesson plans and our activities, we want to keep in mind that not all of your kids are going to be in the same place at the same time. And it's not about having 8, 10, 14 different activities based on their level, but it's about having one activity and what support does each child need. How do we differentiate for each child, wherever they may be? So if we take a look at the symbolic levels, we've got our pre-symbolic, which is that lowest level and corresponds to our sensory motor. We're talking about the fact they might have intentionality. They might be able to attend or maintain focus. They might begin to be building that intentional communication, or you might be just beginning to understand their intentional communication. We're talking about the fact that they might have idiosyncratic gestures, sounds, movements, and you as a parent or you as a teacher or staff might be able to understand them. But does everyone else understand them? Okay. This is the point that there's still not that discrimination between pictures or symbol use yet in order to communicate. This is also the stage where they begin to associate objects or physical settings with routine activities. Here's some examples on your slide right now. Cup means drink, diaper means lay down. Putting my jacket on might mean we're getting ready to go somewhere. This is where kids begin to understand and recognize the routines of the classroom. This is also where there might be limited or simple understanding of cause and effect. Here's where we can begin to have the capacity to sort or combine very different objects. This is that problem solving where trial and error comes in. They might just have an emerging knowledge of cause and effect relationship. This is also the stage where everything goes in the mouth. Or they're doing those repeated movements to gain knowledge of objects. They're still exploring their world. They're still looking and experiencing the senses around them. There's different smells, there's different visuals, there's different sounds. Now, as students begin to develop, they move into the early symbolic level or the early symbolic stage. Here's where there might be some emerging knowledge of symbols, like pictures or logos. In the past, we've talked about how kids can recognize those golden arches of McDonald's quicker than anything else. They might also have emerging functional academic skills. Again, we're talking about those environmental prints, maybe restroom signs or logos of things. We might have emerging knowledge of objects that are related to events or activities. Cereal boxes, toys, the picture of bus, those kinds of things. This is where they might respond to a variety of instructions, not just the verbal, but also with the pictorial support or the visual supports. They might be able to categorize, maybe by color or size. They also might be able to demonstrate a knowledge of cause and effect. Kids have emerging skills. That's the main thing to keep in mind here, that they might not be here, but on some things they might. They're not locked into this stage of development. And by the time they get to symbolic use, they can communicate with symbols, whether it's pictures or words, because words are symbolic. They might use a communication device. Okay, here's where we start seeing emerging or basic functional academic skills as well. We can start talking about decoding and comprehension, understanding what symbols mean, counting or number recognition. This might be letter recognition as well. We might be able to categorize. Here's where we're talking about basic number sense or computation. We might be getting into writing. Okay. Now these come into play looking at access points. And when we're planning our activities, we want to keep in mind where our kids are and what kinds of supports they may need. What kind of access do they need? Is it a switch? Is it just a VOCA or a speech-generating device? Is it more than that? Do we need a lot more visuals? Do we need to have a lot more kinesthetic pieces to go in there? Especially if you have ambulatory kids. They need to get up and have that wiggle time. So it's not only looking at the access, but it's also looking at the demonstrators. So when we start looking at, okay, how can they show me what they know? How can we make it real? How can we make it concrete for them at each of these stages in development? Okay. So let's talk about our curricular supports and the kinds of things that are out there to help you figure out, how do I relate these now to the Common Core state standards? And how do I make these real in my classroom? There are two different groups who were working on the alternate assessments, the Dynamic Learning Maps group and the National Center and State Collaborative group. They both have wonderful supports that are out there to help teachers look at making Common Core state standards and the supports that are available applicable and able to be implemented in your classrooms, working with kids with the most significant cognitive disabilities. I'm going to show you first the NCSC Essential Understanding. When we talk about college and career readiness, in the curriculum resource guides that are up on their website, they actually break it down into each of the elements in math. So we've got data analysis, equations, measurement geometry, fractions and decimals, and then ratio and proportions. So this slide talks about math and how kids can access those Common Core state standards in the area of fluency for reading, writing, and math, or lifelong learning. So when we look at, for example, equations, students will have an opportunity to increase their numeracy and sight word fluency while participating in problem solving related to equations, such as number recognition, symbol identification, reading comprehension, composing equations, and identifying keywords. This curriculum resource guide also goes a step further, and it shows you how to look at the essential understandings in each of those areas as well. But I like how it pulls it out for us for the college and career readiness piece. It also has a companion piece for ELA. So here, there's only 3 pieces up there right now for topic areas in ELA: the reading informational text, vocabulary acquisition and use, and reading literacy text. But it does break it down for you on how to look at this particular element of the college and career readiness piece. Last month we talked about the communication piece, And future webinars, one the next month and one in December, the last one in December, we'll be looking at then how do we address these topic areas around independent work behaviors, around social skills, or those access skills once again. Now, switch over to dynamic learning maps and their ELA. They really break down the essential elements of the standard. So on the left-hand side, you have your college and career readiness standard, which is your regular Common Core state standard. And on the right-hand side, we have the essential element of the standard from the Dynamic Learning Maps group. Okay, so when you take a look at them and you see the relationship, you find out that, yes, they both are emphasizing writing, they both address the topic, and they both include the use of related illustrations and multimedia. So the link is pretty clear when you talk about the supports that are there for you from the Dynamic Learning Maps group. None of the supports are actually watering down, since special ed gets the bad rap for watering down the standard or babying down the standard or dumbing down the standard, whatever you want to call it. It's not a downward extension. It's breaking apart. And remember the old phrase, unpacking the standards? That's what we're looking at. What is the core essence of that standard, and what do our kids need to learn from it? So Dynamic Learning Maps does ELA as well as math. So if you take a look at this math one, I've bolded and italicized the key points where you can see it does cross over. On the left-hand side, the Common Core State Standard is pretty intense, lots and lots of verbiage, lots of different ways to look at it. But the essential element just boils it down into the core essence. What do we need kids to be able to do? Okay, this is a square. This is a circle. These are the angles that are in a square. These are the angles in a parallelogram or whatever. Okay, recognizing angles in geometric shapes. If you were just to go on Google and look up Dynamic Learning Maps, College and Career Readiness Standards, you'd be able to find these on there. Or if you were to Google the National Center and State Collaborative and their wiki page, you'd be able to find the curriculum resource guides. Okay, so if all our kids across the nation are going to have to be exposed to the same standard, how are we going to make sure all kids are getting what they need? The name of my company is Educational Equity for All, giving kids what they need to succeed. It's not even a special ed issue anymore. It's becoming a kid issue. And we want to keep in mind that kids across the board need different kinds of support, whether they're special ed, whether they're gifted kids, whether they're kids that have some issues and are participating in the RTI, the response to intervention, especially level 2 and level 3. All kids need supports of one kind or another. And it doesn't have to just be academic. When we're talking about universal design for learning, we're talking about how we're going to reach those kids. This becomes true differentiation. This is something that I think our special education staff members and teachers and administrators, I think special ed is pretty good at this because we don't wait around. We're always monitoring our kids to find out, oh, that doesn't work, let's try something else. Let's move ahead and try something else and not wait as an afterthought. So I want you to think about a UDL this way. Think about if it's a holiday and you're going to plan this really elaborate, fancy dinner. Okay? You've brought out the china. You've invited all your friends and family to come and join you, and you're going to make pork tenderloin. Okay? So you stayed up all night the night before, defrosting and cooking and getting things ready. You've probably cleaned the house. So you've got a lot invested in this. You've brought out even the champagne, and you've made hors d'oeuvres. Well, lo and behold, the day arrives, and your friends and family are coming in, and suddenly your stomach clenches up, and you get this hot sweat breaking out because Cousin Ralph came over. And you forgot Cousin Ralph is kosher. Cousin Ralph isn't going to eat pork tenderloin. Then your neighbors down the street, because it's a holiday, their adult children are in town, so they brought their kids. Oh, no, kids, little ones. What are little ones going to eat? Are they going to eat pork tenderloin? Or are they going to eat, I don't know, chicken nuggets, mac and cheese? You remember when it used to be fish? So all of this is happening. All of this is going on. And I want to think about how much enjoyment are your friends and family getting out of the event? How much enjoyment are you getting out of the event? Probably not that much. If you take a minute, does this sound familiar in education and what we're always trying to do when something new is rolled out? Oh, surprise, by the way, you have a new student coming in. Oh, no, we don't have any paperwork for them yet. Oh, surprise, here's $500 for your class, but you have to spend it by 5 o'clock tonight. This tends to be our MO. So I love this slide. We tend to always try building the plane as we're flying it. And I love this little guy in the center. He says, I'm not even a mechanic, and we're trying to make it work. I'm sure you all have that passion for the kids you work with. But many times, our lack of organization or our lack of resources and materials or even knowledge sometimes becomes that barrier to learning. When we have to tell the kids in our class, you know what, you wait right there while the other half or these kids over here get to move forward. Because, you know, we've got to test you. We've got to go buy the accommodations that you may need or the support you may need. Oh, wait, we have to go through training to learn how to do this. So it makes it very difficult for our kids to feel a part of and to be able to move forward and get everything they can out of the learning experience. Universal Design for Learning says, you know what, let's think about this. Why not just have a smorgasbord from the beginning? Why not just have all of the materials and resources and things we need for our kids in the beginning? So when the kids come to us, instead of saying, oh, wait right there, no, I'm sorry, you're not really an afterthought, but wait right there, we can say, oh, you need this, here you go. You need this, here you go. And we're able to give them the support they need when they need it, not having to wait. This slide, this cartoon, I think speaks volumes and says it so eloquently. We know in special ed and education that one size does not fit all, and that those alternatives should be for everyone who needs them. Access is for everyone, not just some because there's a label over here or you have this diagnosis. If you need it, you should get it. And it should be designed from the beginning, not as an afterthought, not added on later. Oh, by the way, I guess you could use that. And sometimes that is because we don't know. We don't have the knowledge. So I'm so grateful that you've decided to join us today. And I hope you take advantage of the other Ablenet University webinars that are out there so we can continue to build our knowledge base on how to work with these kids. Universal Design for Learning has 3 principles: multiple means of representation, multiple means of action, and multiple means of engagement. If you've been in the field any amount of time, you might recognize these. These are nothing new. How many of you remember MI, Multiple Intelligence by Howard Gardner, and all the different ways that kids are smart, even if they can't show it all the time the way that we might expect them to? UDL gives us that reminder that we need to give kids lots of different ways to represent what they know or to grasp what we're talking about. If you think about it, we've got some holidays coming up, and you think about it, how do you represent feelings for your kids? Or how do you represent Christmas in your classroom? How do you represent friendship? Is it a handshake? Is it a hug? Is it a high five? We go back to the what are we learning, the what of learning, okay? What are we talking about? How do we make it real? Is it through a game? Is it through movement? The second one is action and expression, multiple means of expression. How are we giving our kids opportunities to show us what they know or tell us what they know? Is it through pictures? Is it through eye gaze? Is it through a bokeh? Is it through, I don't know, what kind of mean is it? Is it drawing? Is it through dance? Is it through music? And that leads us to the engagement. And our professional standards for the teaching profession talks about engagement. If we look at engagement a lot more, perhaps kids would feel a lot more connected to the school. And this isn't even special ed. This is all kids across the board. And we look at the dropout rate across our nation. Kids are not being connected to. If we talk about engagement, what can we do to get them hooked? If you're working with kids with autism, you know this challenge and how if we tap into their interests, if they're interested in trains and we do a thematic unit to teach our standards through the use of trains, we've got them. Well, at least we've got them for a day, an hour, or a minute, since it changes all the time. But this is true of all kids, and really tapping into their interests, tapping into their experiences. And that's usually what kids with cognitive disabilities are lacking, is that experience of different things. When we talk about universal design for learning, we do want to look at multiple formats and media. What a great way to keep them engaged now through technology. What a great way for them to express themselves or for them to have things represented. We want to look at those multiple ways to express themselves, whether it's our assistive technology pieces on the instruction or on the test. Most of our assessments now are going to be on the computer. It's going to be technology-based. And then tapping into their interest and motivation. What is going to motivate your students to stay connected or to stay focused on that activity? Now, if you, in your classroom, in your school, on your campus, have professional learning communities or communities of practice or even staff meetings, there's some wonderful, already free, put-together modules on Universal Design for Learning. This is a great website, CAF.org. They've been around for quite a while, and they're the ones who are the experts on UDL. I really like this website because not only do they have all kinds of things about UDL in general, but they also have a part of their website, Welcome to Teaching Every Student. They've got case stories, they've got activities, they've got a book builder and a lesson builder. They go into it in a lot of different ways. There's videos, there's guidelines, there's all kinds of stuff that are prepackaged and free that you can sit down with your colleagues and really dig deeper into looking at how we're going to provide the supports for every kid who needs it. So this is a great website, but a few others is the Howard County Public School System. They have a great website that talks about things like the historical foundation, but the brain networks. I'm fascinated with the research right now happening in the brain networks, and it's amazing that the different parts of the brain, the systems of the brain, actually do connect to the three principles of UDL. A great example is the affective system that controls our emotions is actually connected to that engagement, multiple means of engagement. Because if you're connected to something, you actually do have an emotional response. If you like trains, then we use that with trains. It's tapping into that system of the brain as well. So it's fascinating stuff. There's some information there about it. It goes into the barriers to learning, really looking at how sometimes the materials for our students are barriers to learning. Sometimes the environment and the way we set up our classroom might be a barrier to learning, but sometimes it's us and our lack of knowledge. If I don't know enough about assistive technology or communication or switch use or intentional communication, I might not know how to give you access as a student. If I don't know the content, if I don't know enough about math, I'm not going to know how to break it down for you to the level that you may need. So that's a great piece. It again also has a lesson redesign as well. Another resource is out of Maryland, the Learning Link. This one is great. They've got a whole UDL in your classroom, interactive activity, so you can really assess, do a self-assessment for your classroom. When we talk about pathways through the desks or, the routines that you have, how independent are your kids able to be based on what you provided? And then another one that I just love is the Iris Center. It's the Peabody Vanderbilt. They're under accommodations. There's a whole section on universal design for learning. There are modules with case studies. There's information briefs. There's all kinds of different pieces to really explore all about UDL. Talks about the principles of the 4 curricular components of goals, instructional materials, instructional methods, and assessment. So this is a really good one too, and all of these are free. F-R-E-E, free. Okay, so now let's talk about activities, because when we talk about standards, we want to look at activities, and then we want to look at access to those activities. Karen Kane just talked a lot about the fact that the switch is not the activity. We want to look at an activity, a standards-based activity, and then we want to break down how to provide access to that activity. So in this section, I want to give you lots and lots and lots of resources for ways to look at those standards and look at those activities. The first one we want to talk about is reading strategies. What do good readers do before, during, and after reading? So here's some wonderful resources that I like that I've looked at. Now, if we talk about before reading strategies, what does that mean? What do good readers do? Well, they set a clear purpose for reading, activate prior knowledge, and look at those new vocabulary words. Okay? So let's see if we can find some fun ways to do that. Well, Play to Learn Preschool has these wonderful pieces out looking at literature on their website. So we talk about before reading is a book talk, introducing characters, explaining the problem, inviting kids to make predictions, or, old school, just a picture walk. When we talk about picture walks, you remember when we look at the picture book and we go through and we pick out the characters and we look at, what do you think is going to happen? We get excited about the story. We activate prior knowledge. And this is before we even start looking at the words. We let kids become familiar with the pictures and the text. Whenever I walk in the classroom and I see, especially in middle school and high school, and I see baby books like this, board books, I always ask them, well, why are you using those books? What is it about those books that draws your kids? And they always tell me it's the pictures, they're colorful, they're big. Well, you can do that with anything. It doesn't have to be in an elementary or preschool book. We need to consider age-respectful and age-appropriate materials. Another thing is book in a bag. This is where we bring all our fun props together and all our little miniature pieces, and we put it all together, and we let the kids basically act it out. And next, another one is keywords. That wonderful fly swatter that we can cut a hole in, and we can SWAT words, and we can look at how those words look together. Maybe we just pick out one word, and every time that word is said, they do something. They might clap, they might jump up, they might do something to get them engaged with the story. Okay, so then we move on to during reading. Again, we're working on making connections, asking questions, making inferences. What do kids need to be able to do? So let's, oops. Yes, okay. So here we go. Practical AAC has a wonderful piece on their website called Building Communication Skills During Storybook Reading. And if you notice at the bottom right-hand side of your slide that you can download communication boards for the books that they use in their studies here. So, of course, this one is one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. And talking about how to do this strategy of reading, asking, answering, and prompt. I love that it's scripted out. Makes it very easy for us to follow along. Makes it very easy for other staff members to work this activity. So your parent eds or your instructional staff might be asked to work with kids, not just read to them, but have them engaged in the story. Okay? Incorporate movement. I love this picture on the right-hand side of your screen. It was found on Pinterest. So we can get them up and moving and active. That kinesthetic learning becomes so important to them. Okay? Repeated refrains. There's lots and lots of stories out there from preschool all the way through high school with repeated lines. Halloween is coming up in high school. If we take a look at exposing kids to poetry, poetry often has repetitive lines. We can do, right now, we can do Edgar Allan Poe. And there's lots and lots of stories that even fit the theme of the month. But you can take a look at any of the Eric Carle stories were wonderful at the elementary level for repeated lines. We used to have plays and have our kids act them out and have all of their lines on a communication device. Let them participate in the telling of the story. Make the activity something we're providing access to. Okay? Another one during is sequencing. If you go online to a lot of these authors like Jan Brett, who wrote The Mitten here, on their website they have pictures you can download of the characters and of the story itself. So they can place it in sequence. You can do it with Velcro or put the pictures in a any kind, and put them on a board or any charts. You can put them, you can use them any way you want. You can put them on a mask or on a popsicle stick, pocket charts. All of these things are great, and they're already printed out, already created for you. All you have to do is print them out. When we talk about after reading, there's all kinds of things we want to do after reading that story. So you see, we can do these activities over and over again, and it can take a week or a month to read one story and become very involved with that story. We can act it out. After we read it, after we go through it a couple times, after we identify characters, we can act it out. Whether it's having our kids be the characters and say the lines, or whether it's having our kids activate a switch to make that little toy go over, and as you see on the right-hand side, that billy goat may be knocking over the bridge with the troll on it. Okay? Getting them involved and engaged in what's happening with the story. Comparing stories. We used to go do, for example, all of the Cinderella stories. There's a different Cinderella story for almost every culture and country. Helping kids to make those connections. Okay? I want to share this one because when we talk about those Common Core state standards, this was one of my students, and we want to talk about how do we provide that access within the context of an academic activity. On the top, we have the standard. Recite the Pledge of Allegiance and sing songs that express American ideals. Well, this student of mine was functioning below 24 months, and she was nonverbal, and she really wasn't going to be able to comprehend the Pledge of Allegiance. But the standard, the alternate achievement standard at the time, was that she will recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I went to Target and I just got a book that has the Pledge of Allegiance on each page, and I gave her a step-by-step. And I recorded on that step-by-step each page of that book. So all she had to do was activate her step-by-step and turn the page. And she was able to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Meanwhile, in the context of that academic activity, think of all the functional skills you see her working on right here. In the left-hand picture, look at that attention. She's attending to task, which is something she was never able to do. So that was one of her IEP goals. And here it's been documented that she was engaged in a task she was interested in, and she was able to attend to it. She was able to orient to that task. She's also interacting with materials appropriately. She's also socializing with someone else appropriately. All of these were the kinds of things we had IEP goals for, and they could be practiced within the context of an academic lesson. Here's another example. When we're talking about English language arts and we're talking about those WH questions, this was an activity where we were doing a Farmer Nadell or Old MacDonald, and each child had their own book, but when we came to that animal, only one child had the animal that could be pulled off. In this picture, you see this child pulling off the sheep. I want to look at adapting our books. This is a great book called The Jacket I Wear in the Snow, and the left-hand page has these great big pictures that all you have to do is scan in, cut out, laminate, and you have an interactive story. Now, sometimes our stories have too many pictures to be able to do that. So I took the little board maker picture and just put it in the corner. So I had the kids still coming up, pulling them off, even if they had to have support, and they were able to go put it up on a board or a pocket chart. I want to share with you the Paul V. Sherlock Center on Disabilities. If you're not familiar with this, this is a wonderful website, wonderful resource that has stories from preschool through high school done in the format that you see right now. Each story is free. You can print it out, download it as a PDF, and you can adjust it. Maybe this has too much on a page for your kids, so you want to cut out some of those and put them on strips and be able to use them like this. For many of those stories, there's also a PowerPoint that the kids can activate and move forward. Or it also reads to you, so it can read the story for the kids. Things like Beowulf are on here, Diary of Anne Frank, all the way down to preschool. Of course, Ablenet has a wonderful piece of assistive technology called the bookworm that will turn any book into an audible book where they can engage with it and interact with it. And then I love this one. This is Baby Lit Classic Literature Books. And they've taken basically what I would consider high school books like Wuthering Heights, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and they're providing it for children 0 to 3 years old. So here is a great example of how to take a high school book and be able to expose your kids to the same stories their non-disabled peers are getting, but we're looking at different things in the book, whether it's weather, animals, colors, opposites in Sense and Sensibility. But it's a great set. You can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. There's about 2 dozen stories that they've done this way. Don't forget the switches to activate stories or the computer stories. Saddleback Publishing also has books that are all the way down to 0 to 1 reading level that are very easy to work with and develop into all these other pieces we've been talking about to engage. And the Action Dictionary from Ablenet, yay, this is one of the greatest pieces, if you haven't seen this yet, to really look at providing access to your kids. This is a great piece to have your paraeducators taking a look at and how to get them on board with providing access to everything for your kids. Looking at writing. What is writing these days? Writing today tends to mean keyboarding because even the assessments are going to be done on the keyboard. I love the picture in the upper right-hand corner. I found this in a classroom in a computer lab. If I'm still going to teach the ABCs, no longer do I need to just say it in rote or in music. Why not introduce it to you on a keyboard? These are a wall. These are those take-home boxes. from your restaurant. Now, I recommend you just call the restaurant and you get clean ones and not try to use your leftover ones. But what a great idea for your kids. Accessible math, there's lots and lots of apps out there now. Of course, music. Today we've got music for everything. You can find music for almost every concept. Again, if we're going back to picture books, there's lots and lots and lots of picture books that are out there for kids to be able to use on all different kinds of topics and concepts. If we take a look at the Ablenet's focus on STEM, and that's math, there's lots of different activities there. So if you do have focus on math or focus on STEM and the focus on math piece, you've got lots of different ways to take a look at those math concepts and providing access. Okay, and a resource that I do want to let you know about, I put out 8 newsletters a month, one whole newsletter just on assistive technology. And they're free, they're only 2 pages, there's continued resources and tips and tricks and lots of different resources for you in the classroom or professional development, free professional development that's available. Lots of different kinds of things on those. But I also do one for preschool, one for autism, one for parent educators, one for adult transition. I do one in general for teachers working with kids with moderate to severe disabilities. And I have 2 brand new ones that I've just started putting out called Looking at Common Core for Students with Disabilities and Parent Partnership. If you're interested, my email is right there, Ms. Tana D at Educational Equity for All. I'm happy to put you on a distribution list. They come out every first week of the month. So feel free to share them. If you're interested, again, just email me and use them. They're meant to be shared. They're meant to be used. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us in this particular webinar. This was part 2 of the College and Career Readiness piece. I hope you got some great ideas for activities in teaching your kids those gaining fluency for reading, writing, and math in the Common Core state standards. I look forward to your joining us next time in November, where we are looking at those work study skills, and then we're looking at the social skills, and then I think in December we're going to be looking at the access skills. So thank you all very much, and that concludes our webinar for today.